Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 700 Club. I'm Andrew Knox in for Gordon Robertson. Israel is giving the talks for a hostage release deal another chance. The War Cabinet has voted to send a delegation to Paris for negotiations.
Israeli military forces are increasing their assault on Hamas in Gaza, just as new reports surface of the terror group's brutal sexual violence against women and girls. CBN's Paul Strand brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Israel's war against Hamas started months ago in the north of Gaza, but the military says it's still expanding its operations there. Troops were seen running and firing as they made their way building to building. And as the fighting continues, Israeli negotiators are headed back to stalled talks aimed at getting the release of up to 130 hostages that Hamas may still hold captive in Gaza. Israel's returning to talks because mediators say Hamas has softened its demands, like a total end to the war. Even so, Israel's goal is to keep going till it has permanently ended the threat of Hamas. Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz has repeated his demand that Hamas release all the hostages before the March 10th start of Ramadan. If they don't, he says the IDF will launch its offensive even during that Islamic holy month into its last major target. That's the city of Rafah, which right now is packed with more than 1 million Palestinian refugees who fled earlier fighting in other parts of Gaza. Meanwhile, more information on that new report to the United Nations showing horrific sexual violence committed by Hamas against Israeli women and girls October 7th. The head of the group issuing the report told CBN's Julie Stahl the brutal attacks included gang assaults and shooting women in their private parts.
It was systematic, planned, intentional sexual violence atrocities, very sadistic and very brutal. It's very hard to see that these kind of things happen, and the world denies, doesn't care, doesn't believe.
And in areas where Israeli forces have eliminated the terrorist threats, some of the tens of thousands of Israelis who evacuated many dozens of communities close to Gaza after Hamas's deadly attack are preparing to return to their homes. Many were too terrified of another invasion or continued barrages of missiles from Gaza, but both threats appear nearly over. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was dealing with the same issue of getting Israeli evacuees back to their homes, but this time in northern Israel, near the border with Lebanon. Many fled the almost daily shelling and drone attacks launched by Hezbollah terrorists since October. Netanyahu was visiting troops on the Golan Heights and promised an end to the Hezbollah threat and safety for Israeli residents.
We will achieve it in one of two ways, by military means, if required, in a political way, if possible.
Meanwhile, he's presented his war cabinet a plan for Gaza after the war. It includes a complete demilitarization of Gaza, except for Israeli troops manning a buffer zone between Gaza and Israel. It calls for de-radicalizing Gaza's Palestinians. Polls show they, by a vast majority, support Hamas's goals of wiping out the nation of Israel and its entire Jewish population. The post-war plan also envisions a takeover by local Palestinians experienced in governing, but only if they're not connected to terrorist groups. Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks so much, Paul. And we certainly hope there is fruit from these negotiations and hostages are released. In other news, the White House is imposing new sanctions on more than 500 targets in Russia. Brody Carter has that story and more from the CBN Newsroom. Brody?
Andrew, the sanctions come after Vladimir Putin's suspected involvement in the death of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. One relatively unknown aspect of Navalny's life was his Christian faith, and that he read the Bible for guidance. Dale Hurd has that story.
47-year-old Alexei Navalny was President Vladimir Putin's fiercest opponent, crusading against official corruption and organizing large anti-Kremlin protests. He died last week in the Arctic penal colony where he was serving a combined 30-year sentence. Many believe he was murdered. At his sentencing in 2021, Navalny, once an avowed atheist who had made fun of organized religion, surprised the court when he said he had become a Christian. Sergei Rakuba is the leader of Mission Eurasia.
While he was at the court, I believe he presented the most powerful sermon out of that cage. You know, he was kept in the courtroom. He said that he's not atheist anymore, and referring to the Bible as an ancient book that the world should adopt and build their rules for living on, for daily living.
Navalny returned to Russia in 2021 against the advice of many, after the government had tried to poison him. He continued to mention his faith on social media. Some thought Navalny's conversion a political tactic, but Rakuba believes it was genuine.
When we started digging more, we now see that in the process, when he had to go through all the challenges, fighting for his life, he said that he found God. And now communicating with some of the church leaders in the evangelical community, we understand that he was in contact with few and searching for eternal values, as he says.
When Navalny announced his conversion to the court in 2021, he quoted from Christ's Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." He said he viewed this verse as a command that he needed to do something to save his nation. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, back here at home, AT&T says the cell phone network outage that lasted for hours Thursday was a result of a technical error and not a cybersecurity attack. The problem was reportedly caused by an issue with a software update while AT&T was expanding its network. The outages began at 3:30 in the morning and peaked around 73,000 reported incidents. The problems affecting even some local police departments and their 911 call centers. That included Charlotte, Mecklenburg PD, and the San Francisco fire departments as well. Some cities informed people they should use their landline phones. However, many Americans no longer use those. AT&T is the largest cell phone carrier in the country with more than 240 million subscribers. Well, turning to election 2024, former President Trump is pledging to defend Christianity and religious liberty. That is, if he wins the White House in November, making those promises in a speech last night to religious broadcasters. Here's CBN Washington correspondent Jenna Browder.
Former President Trump addressing an enthusiastic crowd at the annual National Religious Broadcasters Convention. The organization celebrating its 80th anniversary this year.
This great organization has helped spread the Word of God, the love of Christ, the stories of the Holy Bible, and the voices of famed evangelical people and evangelists like the late, great Pat Robertson, who was a great gentleman, got to know him very well. Great evangelist. And, of course, Billy Graham. How good was Billy Graham, right?
CBN White House correspondent Abigail Robertson at the gathering in Nashville.
President Trump marks the 6th time a former or sitting president has addressed the NRB. President Biden and GOP primary candidate Nikki Haley were also invited to speak, but declined.
In his speech, Trump touted the accomplishments of his first administration, including his record on abortion, Israel, the Supreme Court and judges, and religious liberty.
And I will fight even harder for Christians with 4 more years in the White House. We did things that the likes of which nobody has ever done for Christians in this country.
In another announcement, he promised to create a new federal task force on fighting anti-Christian bias.
But no one will be touching the cross of Christ under the Trump administration. I swear to you, that will never happen. Never happen. And we have to save our country. But Christians, they can't afford to sit on the sidelines in this fight. They have to really get out there. They have to do what they have to do, and they have to win.
The former president is moving on to the next Republican primary tomorrow in South Carolina. Trump is looking for another early state sweep after big wins in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. And polling suggests he'll easily get it. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Yeah, it certainly is wonderful to see a call out for CBN News from the former president. Andrew, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brody. And that South Carolina primary will most likely confirm what everyone expects, that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee sooner or later. I think the more perplexing thing is the Democrats. Will Joe Biden lead the ticket in the next election? We will see. It's going to be very interesting to find out.